So this has been announced by the Honorable Prime Minister, and there have been various comments in the press. The Honorable Minister of Finance also has suggested that we are examining that possibility. So yes, I mean the government is at the moment in informal consultations. What I can say is that the IMF regularly visits the country. They send a team twice a year since we are still beneficiaries of what was called a standby facility that was granted to the government of Sri Lanka in 2009. And that facility was drawn down at that time, and we are in the process of repaying it. So during the life of that loan, we have biannual consultations. So that team from the IMF will be due sometime in February next year. And as part of that consultation, the government may decide to make a formal request for some sort of arrangement between the IMF and Sri Lanka. But it's very early days and nothing has been decided so far. We are awaiting the return of the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister after the holidays to resume that discussion. No, my main response to that is that the world economy is slowing down. I think all the forecasts, if you look at the IMF forecasts for world economic growth for the last 3 quarters, they have been bringing it down, sequentially. So, in fact, I saw the head of the IMF make a statement yesterday where she has said that the prospects for global economic growth in 2016 are looking quite bleak. So we have to be aware of that. You can see our export performance has been affected. Tea prices are down, rubber prices are down, mainly because Chinese imports are slowing down because their banks are lending less money than they used to in the past. So that is a fact that we have to accept. So that has a knock-on effect on Sri Lanka. We are part of the international economy, and the growth slowdown, I think, is partly due to that. But I think despite that, the fact that we are able to grow at over 5% is, I think, testimony to the resilience of our economy. The fact that domestic consumption has been boosted by the income augmentation policies of the government, and also the fact that we've recovered from the drought of last year. The agriculture in particular, I think, has done much better this year, and construction activity continues apace. So I think we have a fairly well-balanced economy. The only thing that is missing is this external growth factor, remittances from our foreign expatriate Sri Lankans, and also our export performance has obviously suffered because of the international slowdown.
Consequential expectations of the world increase a little bit partly.
So that is precisely why the discussions with the IMF assume such importance. In fact, I think the Honorable Prime Minister, when he made his statement in Parliament, said that the reason we are going to talk to the IMF is because of the uneasy situation in the Middle East with the ISIS attacks, etc., which are creating an element of instability in that region. Remember, about 50% of our foreign remittances, which amounted to $7 billion last year, come from the Middle East. So that was the reason the Prime Minister mentioned on the 5th of November. And I would say that the Federal Reserve hiking rates is another reason, even more reason why we should keep the international agencies close to us during this potentially volatile period ahead.
Can you explain the advantages and disadvantages of increasing the SRR?
Yes. Well, I think it's in you would have seen the transcript of our decision, the press release yesterday. Basically, there's been an overhang of excess liquidity in the money markets. And this overhang has been gradually reducing over the course of this year. And it's been converted into lending by the banks, who've become increasingly aggressive through the whole of 2015. Now, that's a good thing because it meant that economic growth has proceeded apace, and the economy in general has been doing well. But of course, it has created some strain on the balance of payments because a lot of that credit growth is flowing out of the country in terms of imports, particularly of vehicles. So you would have noticed that in September we issued guidelines to finance companies and banks about leasing of vehicles, where we restricted credit facilities to that particular segment. So in general, what we find is that this conversion of this excess liquidity into more aggressive lending has now resulted in a situation where bank lending is reaching a point that could stimulate inflation beyond levels that we think are prudent in 2016. And that's really why we thought that applying the increased statutory reserve ratio. Mind you, our statutory reserve ratios are quite low by international standards. At 6%, I would say they are low compared to other countries where typically they are between 8 to 12%. So they're still, even at 7.5%, I would say low by international standards. But we thought it prudent to raise them so that for every dollar that a bank receives in terms of its deposits, in the past it could lend 94 cents. Now it will only be able to lend about 92.5 cents, right? That's how your statutory reserve requirement works. The credit multiplier becomes less large. And we didn't think it was appropriate to raise interest rates at this point because our interest rates are already significantly higher than the rate of inflation. So in real terms, Sri Lankan interest rates are still reasonably high. And it would be damaging for the growth of the economy and business in general for us to raise interest rates aggressively at this point. But let's watch and see what the Federal Reserve Bank does in the months to come. The market is wide open in terms of its expectations. Some analysts out there are expecting another rate hike by the Fed in March. If that transpires, then you will definitely have a lot of volatility, and our Central Bank of Sri Lanka will have to review our monetary policy stance once again. We have punched below our weight in terms of FDI, that much is a fact. So we have, for this year, I think about $1 billion is probably the best we can do, maybe even less than that. But remember, in the previous years, 1.5 billion was more or less the average that we got each year. And a lot of that was Sri Lankan Airlines investments. Each time we bought an aircraft, that went in as foreign direct investment, which I think was very misleading because Sri Lankan Airlines is an offshore company, and therefore investing in airlines was considered part of the FDI, which was misleading. The second point was a lot of that FDI came in the form of telecom investments, which really aren't job creating. So really the whole perspective on FDI now has to be re-looked at. We have to look at more manufacturing types of FDI coming into the country, and that's where the plan to set up special economic zones is absolutely critical. This is not rocket science. Basically, what other countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, and China have done is that they build these special economic zones so that investors who come in there, both local as well as foreign, find it easy to conduct their business. They don't have interference from the tax authorities and customs and all these multiple government agencies who typically, make it difficult for somebody to do business. That's the case in all countries. So in a special economic zone, you have one authority, typically the BOI, who undertakes those type of governmental activities on behalf of the departments concerned. And that then is a way to attract investors into the country. Now, we haven't built any special economic zones in this country for several decades. And that, I think, is really why the emphasis in the manifesto of the UNP and also the government's economic policy statement emphasize that need for that. That's, there are some empty factories there. I know this personally because I used to work in the BOI. What happened is the lease agreements on some of those empty properties are not transferable. And as a result, the BOI has been unable to give those over to new investors. So that's why I think the government brought this, the Acquisition Act last year, which hopefully will enable them to take over those unused properties and give it to new investors. That has historically been one of the problems in the BOI to handle those empty properties in the past. So there are vacancies in the existing zones. But I think there definitely is scope for new zones to be built. In the history of the BOI and the GCEC, whenever we built a zone, we were able to fill it up. That, I think, is testimony to that model. So we should do more of that.